Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Everyday Equity, Everyday Ways to Make a Change. I am your host, Pooja Kothari, founder of Boundless Awareness. And I am so excited for today's guest. We talked so long ago, and today is finally here for her LinkedIn Live. Jessica Bantom. Jessica is the global leader for equity, diversity, and belonging at DLR Group and the author of this amazing book, Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World. I'm so excited to talk to Jessica because, as you all know, we talk to a variety of people across industries, and Jessica is in a fantastic position as an interior designer and as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. So welcome, Jessica. I'm so happy
Thank you
to
so
have
much.
you here. Yes. I want to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. I feel like I am in a very like the best position I could be in professionally, like being in this intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion and design. Um, I have a career that spans both areas. In terms of interior design, I've actually been working in that space since about 2006. And then on the other side, in terms of my other kind of consulting world and experience, I've been an IT consultant, then a management consultant, and then I pivoted to DEI in 2019. So now I'm at this space where I really get to dig a little deeper with my diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but specifically in this context of design. And there are just so many opportunities that we for us to grow and create equitable outcomes through our work as designers. So I'm really excited to kind of be in this space and to be building on all of these different experiences I've had over my career too.
Totally. It's so interesting when you see industry from all of these vantage points, and then you can really see where are we lacking and kind of the trends of where people are thinking about and where the pitfalls generally are coming in over and over and over again. I'd love to ask you about what does belonging, equity, inclusion mean to you? How does it fit into your profession now? And also, like, what have you seen over the course of your career?
Yeah, very, very interesting question. So it's interesting, even just from the concept of what DEI or DEIB is. I feel like it's just become a term that's kind of it's used in so many different contexts, and I don't think people really take time to separate out what all of the the elements of it are. When you really look at it, I see diversity, inclusion, and belonging is a set of values, and equity as an outcome that we're striving towards.
I
So,
love that. Can
and
we
I
write
think
that down?
and I think even by separating it out that way, we get a deeper understanding of what all the work ultimately is about. So to me, we are striving towards equity as an outcome, and that's a place where um, there is balanced support that is provided to people based on their individual needs that ultimately gives everyone fair access to opportunity, reward, safety, security, and dignity, regardless of their identity. And in order to achieve that, we have to honestly value diversity itself. We have to honor the fact that we all, there's just so many different ways that we experience the world and so many different identities, and to really just honor and accept that. Then there is the inclusion aspect, where we have to not only honor those things but value them and create spaces and experiences where people feel comfortable, and they feel like they have a place kind of sharing their perspectives. And then to me, the other side, even of inclusion, is belonging, in that you can do a whole lot of work proactively or think that you're really creating a lot of opportunities and spaces for people to feel included. But belonging is about whether and how those practices or those efforts actually work.
Yeah.
So, we can spend as much time as we want coming up with what we think is an inclusive environment. But if we don't then open the space up, or even before we come up with our concepts, kind of open the space to ask people how they feel included and to ask them how effective our efforts actually are, you're not going to really achieve belonging. And you're not going to know whether your efforts to include are actually ultimately achieving that objective. So I feel like these are concepts that are kind of lumped together, and in doing that, we also kind of miss the importance of each component of it. To me, this work really is about advancing equity. It's about really working towards getting to this place where we can all, people use that term like bring your full selves to whatever you're doing and wherever you are. But I think even with that, we have to dig a little deeper to what that really means. And to me, it means that people can come into any space and not carry the burden of having to cover up some aspect of their identity or be so concerned about how they're being perceived that they can just be who they are and be there for the purpose of whatever that space is. So if I come into a workplace, I'm not worried about being seen as the Black person, as the woman, or being expected to necessarily explain and describe all of my identity. But I'm in a space where everybody has the freedom to do that, where there's acceptance of other perspectives. So I don't have that weight on me. I can show up. If I am a designer, I can show up to be a designer, not the Black designer, or, not the designer who is trying to assimilate to the environment that I'm in. I'm coming up to work just like everybody else works. And I have the freedom to create because I'm not spending energy trying to cover or, diminish any aspect of my identity.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I get a little stuck on uh diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, because it can sometimes feel to clients that, okay, well, we have to change everybody's mind in order
Mhm.
for there to be belonging, or everybody has to believe in these 5 values, and maybe they're not important to some people and maybe more important to others. And so when we're thinking about, like, in your current position at
Mhm.
DLR Group, like, is it about changing? Is it about everybody believing the same thing?
It is not, because no one ever will. I think there's a whole lot of things, like we can have these broad concepts, but when does that ever happen? Like we have to realize that we are doing human work with human beings, right? So number one, off the bat, no one's ever all going to believe the same thing. They're not all going to agree with absolutely everything. And I don't see my work as changing minds. I see my job to be opening minds.
Mhm.
Now, and I think that a lot of the ways that we're showing up in the world come from being very closed-minded or just having limiting life experiences that then limit our understanding of other people. Um, so I feel like my job is to just open people's minds just a little bit, even to the concept that other people are experiencing the exact same moment, the exact same environment, the exact same experience in a different way because they live in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's more just to me about have operated like acknowledging, accepting, and operating in that awareness, as opposed to you need to show up, you need to have these conversations, you need to embrace all of these things. Um, I just feel like there's more power in just having the awareness and then also then giving people that choice as to what they're going to do with it. We
Yeah.
can't dictate that everyone's going to process things the same way. And I sometimes I actually get asked that question about like, well, what are you going to do about the people who just don't buy into this? And my response is, I don't have the energy to waste on the people who are not going to buy into this. If there are the people who are at least going to at least open to it, and then maybe even better than that, they want to make change based on their new understanding, that's where I want to focus my energy. Because I also feel like that's the majority of people, that if even if they don't have the full understanding of it, they may have a level of curiosity, and that's enough to bring about different kinds of conversations. And I can't waste energy on the few people who are just like have their heels dug in, and this is not something they're going to do. I just much rather empower the people who are even inclined to think different ways.
Yeah. You know what's funny is that when we build more equity, everybody benefits. So
Exactly.
even the people who don't want to partake in it, or quote unquote don't believe in it, actually end up benefiting from it. Like when we make things accessible, like when there's regular and safe curb cutouts, for
Right.
example, on the
Hmm.
street, everybody benefits. It's not just for people who use wheelchairs. It's for people who are rolling suitcases, who are pushing strollers, who have a grocery cart that they wheel with them to the grocery store. So everybody benefits, and yet we see it only as a disability issue
when it's not exactly. And that's the thing about expanding our awareness, right? And just understanding of how we're all navigating the world. I think that often comes into play even in the case of age. Where it's ironic, the majority of the workforce is in these ages, broadly speaking, that may not be impacted by age-related conditions, things like that. But that doesn't mean we're not going to ultimately get there. You know what I mean? Just like have this awareness by making things even just like in a similar way, like we make things more accessible, for different physical conditions. Age is a condition, if you want to think about it that way too, where if there are certain things, different ways that people would need to be able to navigate space, use things, etc. And to your point, that could be advantageous to anyone, regardless of their age, or it could be advantageous in a particular situation where maybe you're dealing with an injury. It may not be permanent, but if things are already designed in a way that anyone can navigate a space, regardless of whatever challenges they're having, you will find that to be particularly beneficial, and very happy to see that that's there if you're in a season where you need assistance. So I think just having that broader understanding of the different ways and the different places and seasons and conditions we could experience over the course of life, that can change how much value we place on these things.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk a little bit about your design background. And when we talk about design, interior design, or just looking at the questions and assumptions that designers make, how does equity, inclusion come into design? Like what assumptions do designers make? For those people in our audience who aren't familiar with the design world, can you introduce us?
Yeah. So I think, well, one thing I have to say is that being a designer, I feel like is a huge responsibility and a gift. Because when you really think about it, whatever you design ultimately could be used by anybody. So we have to operate from that standpoint of the fact that whatever we create, we ultimately have no control over who's going to use it, who's going to experience it out into the world. And for that very reason, I think designers have to have that awareness in the design process, that ultimately you're designing for everybody. You're not designing just for people who look like you, for people who navigate spaces like you, for people of your religious background, your beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that is never like explicitly stated in most places. That we have to understand the breadth of what we're doing, the impact of what we're doing too. And it's interesting because in the design space, a lot of times where we do start talking about things around equity, the conversations tend to default to accessibility, to disability. And I think that is number one, because legally, those are things that we have to comply with, right? So that sets, a precedent there. It makes us prioritize that particular identity. But it also, I think, has kind of limited us because that's where our default is. And we think about that, especially in the context of universal design, where we're talking about making things accessible, et cetera, useful to everybody. However, we also have to think about design being inclusive. And sometimes even in that conversation, so different term, but often also defaulting to the conversation of accessibility. In being like practicing inclusive design that goes beyond ability to include designing for differences in race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, body size, socioeconomic status, all of those things. And we're not consciously getting into those other areas. I think that we default once again to accessibility because we've been forced to, in terms of science, and because I think it's an easier topic for us to navigate, quite honestly. When you think about function, like I think people, even if it's, you may not have challenges, physical challenges yourself, you can kind of relate to that because we all have certain things that are a common frame of reference for us in terms of walking, vision, hearing, things like that. But we're more challenged by things like race, ethnicity, body size, religion. But that can't be the excuse not to go there.
Mm-hmm.
uh, in what the way I look at it too, and especially in conveying these concepts to designers, is that we are creators, and the more information we have, the more innovative and creative solutions we can make. So to me, exploring these areas that we haven't been bold enough to go into could actually open us up to a whole new set of tools and resources for us to become better designers with. And that's like from a very basic standpoint. That's not getting into our personal challenges about things. That is just kind of the facts of design.
Yeah. What do you have examples maybe in your book, or you know some questions or ways that you can advise designers to ask these questions, like where could people start?
Yeah, that is a great question, and that's actually what drove me to write my book too, because just in general, in the practice of DEI, I think we often speak broadly about concepts. So we talk about concepts like unconscious bias, microaggressions, privilege, things like that, but we don't talk about what they mean in the context of how we show up. And that was what I really wanted to do for designers in my book, Design for Identity, is to talk about different behaviors that we can adopt. And to your point, even different questions that we could ask in the design process to make space for these discussions about identity, and to tap into this additional information that can empower us to create in an authentic way, and so that people see themselves authentically represented in what we're creating. So I actually created what I call the Design for Identity Blueprint, which is actually kind of like an evolved version of our existing design process. So even across disciplines, there are basic steps that we all kind of go through in this process. And what I wanted to do was to insert different questions along that process, so that number one, we don't leave identity off the table. And number two, so we don't start conversations about identity at the beginning of the design process and then never revisit it throughout the whole thing until people see this thing that we came up with that is our interpretation of what they gave us. So I suggest questions like, when you first engage with the new customers, asking something like, what about your identity would you like to see celebrated in this space or this product?
Yeah.
And that just opens up this, space for a whole different kind of conversation, as opposed to you coming in with this narrative that you've made up about these people and just trying to confirm it. And
Yes.
then there's the importance of going back through the design process and validating, like, so this is what you told us. This is what the concept we're developing. Are we on the right track? Are there other things we should consider? Are there things that we should prioritize? Are there things we just flat out got wrong?
Mhm.
And being willing to take that information and being willing to pivot, and receiving it as something that's to our benefit and not a judgment of us.
Yeah,
So
one of the things that comes to mind actually when is like a prayer closet, for people with different, whatever religious belief you have, if you, or a spiritual belief you have, to a place to just sit down and meditate or pray, or but it's like a specific area of the home that might have to be in a specific direction, facing direction, or a size to hold whatever symbols you want in that area when you are engaging in your religion or spirituality. And that is, for some people, they're thinking about that and they're like, well, obviously we're going to have a space to put our idols or symbols, in a place to sit and pray or meditate. And if you're a designer who's not thinking about it, or who's not very religious or spiritual, or just doesn't follow in whatever way, you might not be thinking about that, because if it doesn't pertain to you, you might not think about asking somebody else.
exactly, that is a perfect example, and that's something where even in my design education, when we were learning about residential design, that's not a conversation we were taught to have.
Mm.
It's not something that we were, we were advised to even incorporate into this our initial consultations about, like, are there particular functions that you would like supported in your home? Or going back to even to that simpler, broader question, or, what about your identity would you like to see celebrated? And I think in not making space for that, if people are already hesitant or they don't feel safe to go into
Mhm.
something so personal, or don't feel like you would value it, they're not going to bring it up. And to me, that's us doing a disservice to our customer, because people shouldn't feel constrained by what they think we think, or what they think we don't know, or what we're not open to. So there is power in making space for those conversations. And as a designer, I will say I may not be familiar with everything that a client, a customer puts on the table,
Yeah.
but I take that as new information. Like, to me, that's an opportunity for me to learn something in the process of doing what I do and growing as a designer.
Mm. It's also funny because there's a strange, I don't think it's a very obvious power dynamic between a designer who has your expertise and experience in coming into a home, and where someone's looking to that designer for advice and, for knowledge. Um, and yeah, if you're not really cognizant of the power that you hold when you go into someone's home, you might be inadvertently kind of stifling that conversation.
Definitely, definitely. And that's not something I don't think any of us want to do.
Right, 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 right. Um, so, in I feel like we've kind of like moved into like kind of inclusive design or human-centered design. Is that right? So how do we reconcile inclusive design like you've been talking about with design that's exclusively meant to exclude people? And when I think, I'm in New York, and I got this coffee this morning. I still haven't drank it. But I got this coffee, and then I had to tie my shoe because my laces were untied. And so I'm looking to put this down, and there is no flat surface on the way that I'm walking where I can put my coffee cup down, and I don't want to put it on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm looking, and every surface is either rounded or slanted. So
Mhm.
I can't, my shoelaces are untied. I can't put my cup down anywhere on a window. So there's no sills or like places to put it down. So that's what I think about when I'm thinking about like meaning to exclude people. Like, you don't want people loitering here, so don't make any
Mhm.
flat surfaces.
Mhm.
Um, so how do we reconcile? Mm, there are architects and agencies, and developers who intentionally make design excluding.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile these two things? Are they mutually exclusive?
I don't know that they're exclusive. I know that design can reinforce behavior and can facilitate certain behaviors, and we need to own that. I think this is a really real point, though, because this is where we really have to get honest and make space for really exploring these conversations, even with clients. Now, I make the distinction here between clients and customers because that also plays into things.
Mm-hmm.
Clients are the ones writing the checks, so ultimately, sometimes they are the decision makers, regardless of what the customer needs may be. And I think that's also just in a way that, like, a reality of the design dynamic and the design relationships. So some things that consumers may value don't necessarily make it into the world because a client made a decision.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do also have to, as designers, respect the objectives of the client. Now, I think what can be challenging there, or actually not necessarily challenging, but something we have to be cognizant of, is, given all of this, setting expectations with customers too when we open this dialogue about what they want. Because ultimately there are going to be decisions that have to be made regardless of any group you're working with. I mean, you could have a great conversation with a group of customers and come out with like 100 ideas of things that they want to see. I think that's also the responsibility of designers to kind of set that expectation that, yes, we are opening this conversation, and we likely will not be able to accommodate absolutely everything. But what we can do is to prioritize. So if you have this list of 100 things, maybe, like, what would be your top five? Like, what would be the game changers for you? and then we can advocate for those in dealing with the client.
Mm.
So there has to be some give and take in all of this too. Like, I mean, I'm sure all of us would love to be in a situation where everything that we wanted, someone would just give to us. But there are, there are constraints. There are constraints,
Yes.
especially in any process. But I think a lot of that too, like the process of even prioritizing can also be significant. Because if you have like, there are certain things that, you know, they would be the game changer for a customer, knowing that we can figure out how to maybe facilitate those kinds of conversations with the decision makers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So if we're considering our audience are maybe not people who are involved in design, is there a piece of advice or something that you could offer for our audience to think about when it comes to human-centered design, um, equity, inclusion, belonging, in any variety of the hats that you have worn? What is a piece of advice that you can give our audience that might be thought-provoking?
I think that we can all just benefit from, and this is regardless of any situation, any profession, things like that, just pausing to ask, what might other people have experienced or be experiencing that I'm not aware of?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of value in just pausing for that. In so many instances, that could even be when you come into work and your boss is like biting your head off or something. And you're like, I didn't even do anything. Well, maybe they had a fight with their spouse before they came in, or maybe they were in really bad traffic before they got there. Like, just having this awareness that we are all experiencing different things. Even if we're in the same conversation, we're all going to be interpreting it in different ways based on our own lived experiences.
Yes.
So I think that there's real value in that in so many scenarios, just to pause and really, if you see somebody reacting really viscerally to something, you're just like, was it really that deep? Maybe it was to them. You know what I mean? Like,
That's so funny. I think about that with my kids too. My kids are really young, and I'm like, what would happen if I gave them the benefit of the doubt? Maybe
yes,
something happened at school that day that I
right.
would have no idea about. Maybe some she's carrying something that someone said to her that she didn't like, and and she's taking it out on me. Like, how can I be more curious?
Yes.
Even if I never get the answer, because 6-year-olds don't really tell you what they're thinking. But yeah, how can we give the benefit of the doubt, not only to each other, but also wonder, maybe they're experiencing life a little differently than I am.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, okay. Your book is called Design for Identity: How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World. Can you tell us, I just want to put it back up again, who is this book for? Who is it meant for? Who should read it? What will they gain from it?
Yeah. So I wrote the book for designers, for design students, for design educators, and for design leaders. I had all those groups in mind because there are practices and there are behaviors and tips in this book that can help us all address the design process differently. And I was excited about kind of gearing this to students too, and kind of putting it in front of them as well, because they'll be the ones shaping the future of design.
Mm,
So if they can bring these concepts into the conversation and into practice, they have power to really evolve the way that we design. And for practicing designers and design leaders, like, we have the capacity to put these things into practice right now. But it's also interesting because I have had people who have no design background at all, who have read the book and see these concepts apply in any other industry, any other profession, that there are some basic concepts in here that resonate regardless of what you do, because we all ultimately work with people who are different than us. We
yeah,
all ultimately serve people who are different than us. So some of the
yes.
concepts just are pretty, yeah, they apply in many different ways.
Yeah, that's what I love. That's why I was so happy to have you as a guest, because I am the opposite of a designer. I have no design mind, but through our conversations, I mean, I find it fascinating to just kind of go about and have this knowledge to go about the world and start questioning the things that I see on the street or in homes or buildings, and I'm like, this is very interesting. I wonder who it was really designed for, because
Yes.
it doesn't seem like it was designed for a whole swath of people to enjoy, and maybe just people, of certain identities. So
Yeah.
I love it. Get the book wherever you get your books, bookshop.org, Amazon, um, and and really anywhere you can find it. Designed for Identity is not just for designers. It's really a book where we can all challenge our assumptions. You all can find Jessica's work at Jessica Bantom on Instagram, at Jessica Bantom on LinkedIn. Her jessicabantom.com is her direct website. Thank you so much for being here. This was such a cool conversation. We have lots of comments of people really enjoying. We have Tarun who said, very well said. Rekha Srivastava said, nice topic, very useful information. It's being transmitted. And Nadia Garib, thank you for sharing this profound way of looking at design. And she also said, it makes one think expansively when wanting to make our work and home spaces more inclusive in design decisions. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Jessica. And we are actually going to be back next Thursday, so we'll see you all then. Take care. Bye.